Okay, I've got a trade show coming up next month in Vancouver and I've got to get some stuff down for it. One of the things I've been requested to make is a square table that will fit 4 people for condominiums and smaller houses and stuff like that. So I've got some barnwood. It's going to end up being a 3 feet by 3 foot square table. We're going to do it with barnwood. If you've watched my videos before, you know I like to use the thin planks that I make over plywood. The difference this time though is around the edges, instead of just putting like a 3/4 inch edging or nosing around it, I'm actually going to use full 2x6 material and we're going to do a large rabbet cut out of it. So first thing I'm going to do is take these over 3 foot pieces that I've cut over to the joiner. We're going to square up a bottom side and then I'm going to use that to semi-square up my top side just enough so that when I turn it over to plane it down to thickness, I have a flat surface to run on to make the two of them parallel. I'll kind of explain a bit better once we get over to the joiner. Okay, so with barnwood, sometimes you've got to do things a little bit backwards. However, this time and with these boards, I'm going to do it not as backwards. I'm going to do it a bit the right way. So I have here a dual jointer planer. And I'm going to use the top side first, the joiner, to square up the bottom. And then I'm going to flip this top up and then it becomes a planer. And I'm going to use the flat side on the bottom to start to flatten off and take the high points off on the top side. And once enough of that top side is done, then I can flip it back over and continue to plane to thickness. I'm going to plane off the bottom because if I continue to plane off the top, then I lose all of the character. That's always the very first thing you've got to be thinking about when you're working with barnwood is how do I get a flat-ish surface and preserve enough of the barnwood so that that's what shows up on the top of our table. So I'm going to do this one first. We're going to kind of cut down the bottom of it until I like it on all of them. And then, like I say, we'll flip it up and do some more planing. Okay, so now you can see I've taken this bottom and planed most of it off so we have a nice flat surface on the bottom, which means when I turn it over and put it through the planer, this bottom side is sitting nice and flat, and that planer, when it comes to engage on the top, is going to engage it in relation to how the flatness of the bottom. When you have a board and it's a little bit twisted or tweaked or bowed or something like that, if you put it through the planer, then as it goes through, it kind of twists and bends or bows depending on how long your table is or how it's going through. So you don't really end up with a flat surface if the board travels through and as it travels through it twists. You're still just making cuts on the top of it in relation to the bow on the bottom or whatever the shape is in the bottom. So the first reason or the first thing that I'm trying to do is get a flat bottom on this one so that I go through nice and straight. Okay, so now I'm going to flip this top up. You can see here, these are the helical blades that go on my planer jointer. You've got 4 sides to these, which is awesome. So you can basically just loosen the bolts off or the nuts off, the screws off, whatever you want to call them. Flip them one time and you get four cuts out of them. It's less stress on the motor. They cut nicer. They're quieter. And I like them. And then this is my in-feed here, my in-feed table, or not the in-feed table, but the table underneath. So I'm going to come and bring it up until I just start to skim some off the top of these. I'm actually going to find my thickest one and start by bringing that one down, and then I can bring the rest one to that level. So it looks like this one here is the thickest one. So now when I run it through on the bottom, I'm going to start, you can see that these 2 edges are high. So I'll start to push it through and then adjust the table just until I hear the blades interact, engage the wood. And if I can get a clean wood surface off both sides, then I've got a flat board. So when I go back to flip it over, I know that it's sitting flat. Even though the middle might be a little bit lower, when the board is sitting on those 2, if they're parallel to the bottom, then the board's still running through flat. And then I'll plane my boards down to thickness on the back, but I kind of had to do the bottom first to get where I was going. You can see kind of on the top here how it's cutting off this front edge, these two side edges. So like I was already saying, I don't mean to repeat myself, but now when I flip it over and this board runs through, it will be running through flush or parallel in relation to the bottom, and then we'll go down to thickness. Okay, so we've got our boards planed down to the thickness that we want. I've also left the character on the top, but have a flat enough top that I can use and sand. It looks dirty and you can see where the wood is exposed, but if you were here and could rub your hand over it, you would feel that it's actually a flat top. So now what we want to do is get a straight side. I'm going to leave one side live, like still rustic. That's going to be on the outside of the table. And then there's going to be a rabbet cut inside of here. There's going to be a rabbet cut like this all the way up to 1/4 inch on the top here to match the thickness of my thin boards. And so I'm going to have this edge hanging over on the side of the table, so that's what the customer's going to see. And then there's going to be plywood on the inside, and then this is going to come and mount and join up with more of these planks on the outside. So first thing that I'm going to do is cut this 4 1/4 inches back from the live edge of the board that's going to sit on the outside of the table. For that, I'm going to use the track saw. If you've watched my videos before, you know I pretty much preach the religion of track saw all day long. I'm going to use the bottom side that's perfectly plain as the edge to put my track saw on, and then I'm going to plunge through and cut a perfect line. So, pretty simple. We're just going to measure back. Oh hey, want to see something cool? It's kind of stupid actually, but I even have blue lights on my tool wall to show off my Makita tools, even though I don't really like the color of them. Kind of stupid, I know. I'm going to come back 4 1/4. 4 1/4. Set the track on first. Put your saw on. Set the depth so you don't end up cutting through your tabletop on your workbench. There. So now what we've done is we've taken that weird piece, and now we have a nice piece of dimensional lumber that we can work with. And when I go cut out my rabbet cut, I've got a 90-degree, like a perfect 90-degree afterwards. And you'll see next why that's important. Because I'm going to use the table saw to cut this out. And if I wouldn't have had these square, then this never would have ended up right, and I would have been fighting it the whole time. Okay, now we've got this nice square lumber, and just like anything in woodworking, there's a lot of ways to do the exact same thing. So this time for these rabbet cuts, I'm actually going to show you how to do 2 cuts on the table saw to get you where you want to go. The first one we're going to do is I'm going to cut my long cut. I'm going to set this edge up against the fence, and I'm going to set my saw so that I'm cutting 1/4 inch, which is the same thickness as these thin planks that I'm going to be putting on the top as well that go over top of the plywood. And then I'll cut all 4 boards like that. Then I'll reset my saw, reset the height, and I'll cut this one off, leaving 1.5 inches over here. So I'm only left with this big L-shaped thing, which afterwards we'll sit over and we'll glue it and nail it to the top of the plywood. Okay, so the first thing we've got to do is I'm going to take the vacuum and this little guard off my saw. Because we're not going to be cutting all the way through the board, so I've got to have the blade out by itself. I'm going to lift my blade to the top. I know my blade to the top is 2 3/4. And then I'm going to set this fence so it's 1/4 inch away from the blade. And you can either measure and do that, or I know that these are the boards I'm going to be matching up to. So you can just use those boards as the guide to set your fence against. Nice and easy, just so that it just touches runs through and just barely touches the blade. There you go. Now I want to keep this top edge that has the character on it, so that top edge is going to go against the fence, and I'll set it up against the fence and run it through, and it's going to cut through as high as the blade goes, but not obviously go through the entire board. Now that first cut is done, and you can see we're leaving this 1/4 inch on the top, and I've got a nice, even, smooth line that actually should match up really nice with this board. So see now how those two are the same. So when I go to put those on top of my table, you'll see how they match up just nice. Okay, now the next step is I want to make that cut straight down there. So I'm going to set my saw, and you can measure this or just use the saw and the wood itself. I want to come just higher than the cut that I already made, or right into that corner, right about there. And I want to move my saw over, my fence over, until you can flip your board over. I want to be over just until I'm cutting the edge of that off. Just like that. Now I'm the right height and the right distance. And again, because I've squared up these boards, now it sits flat against the fence, it sits flat against either the slide, which I've got on my saw, or just your tabletop, and you're going to cut a nice 90 on the inside. We'll just double check that. I think we're good. So now I've got this nice rabbet cut. This is going to be the edging on the edge of my table. There's going to be plywood inside of here, and then all of my inside pieces inside the table will run off of that. So it makes it nice and clean and smooth, and we've got a nice 90 on the inside, and everything's looking nice. Okay, now I've got my 4 outside pieces that will all go around the outside of the table, so it's time to cut the plywood. I want this to be a 36 by 36 table. These pieces on the outside here, which will fit around the edge of the plywood, are 1.5 inches. So I'm losing 1.5 inches on each side, 3 inches. So instead of cutting my plywood at 36, I'm going to cut it at 33 square, and then I'm going to actually cut 45s on these and match them up around the end, and then we can fill in the inside. All right, moving right along. Next step is we're going to put this edging around the whole deal, or these borders around. I am going to cut 45s on these, so I'll head over to the chop saw. I'll cut one 45, set it out, mark it, cut the next one, work my way around the entire table. I'm going to glue it with this PL Premium and brad nail it on to hold it in place. And these will just fit over nice and square. Another thing I should point out, like now that I've got a nice flat square edge along the front, when I go to cut my 45s, I'll rely on this edge rather than the edge that I left live. If there's any waviness or irregularity on this side, which there probably will be, you're going to end up with 45-degree angles that aren't going to match up that well, and you're going to have to do a little bit of messing around to get them right. But if I trust this one and my saw is set right, which it is, then my 45s are going to match up real nice. So I will also, you'll see when I go to these corners, I will put glue in those corners. Typically, putting a 45 on lumber like this can raise some questions. When your boards move seasonally, those 45-degree angles where they made it up, they don't always work out that well. You know, it's going to be a function of how dry your wood is, how much glue is in between, and what you use. We're actually going to put some bow ties there as well. But because I use such thin wood, there's not a whole lot of strength left in the top of this. Definitely not to bow the whole table. We're mostly just preserving the character of the barnwood. And when I come to these edges, I've got it all glued, I've got it nailed, and I'm going to put bow ties in there. And so we're really going to reduce the amount that it can move and the amount of damage that can happen when it moves seasonally. Okay, the edging's all on, we've got some glue on. Now I'm gonna fill in the center. And because I'm making this for a trade show, it's not for a client yet. I get to do whatever I want on the inside. So I think I'm gonna do, I'm kind of shooting from the hip, but I think I'm gonna do kind of an irregular, or I guess it's a pattern, but I'll start putting boards all around the outside and then work the way to the inside and see what I'm left with a square and maybe do something else on the inside. I don't know. It's choose your own mystery adventure. So we're gonna take these, I'm gonna cut them on the one side to a 90, come and mark it off and find where it's good, cut it, nail it and glue it, work my way in. Okay, so we've got a pretty cool tabletop coming along now. That's how I do a plywood core with those rabbet edges around the outside. So it looks like a solid table, but it's got the strength of the plywood. We're not necessarily relying on the barnwood. As I've mentioned in previous videos, a lot of times some of this barnwood maybe isn't quite the stuff you'd want to rely on for the strength of the table. And so now we've got the plywood underneath. We've got full boards around the outside, which shows the edge of the plywood, or sorry, the edge of the 2x material. And we've got a kind of a cool pattern on there. Also, doing a pattern like this with full 2x6s and joining all that and gluing all that, it's definitely possible, just would take quite a bit of time. Okay, so that's it for this table for now. We're gonna let this one set up overnight, let the glue dry, and then we'll come back and sand it, put some black filler in it, we'll put some color on it, and I'm actually gonna do an epoxy top on this one, and I'll show you how to do epoxy on top of barnwood. And that's it for this video.